Have you ever been heckled before? Have you ever been heckled? When I think of hecklers, I usually think of people who are kind of rowdy during a comedy show, right? And they're trying to distract everyone's attention away from the performer on stage because they don't think the person is doing very well. Or I think of someone who yells boo from the back of the room just when someone steps up on stage to start a song or to begin to speak. And many people last service said that they worked very hard not to yell boo at me. And so control yourselves, 10:30, come on. But I just want us to imagine, how awful would it feel for someone to yell boo when you are the person that all eyes are on? Like, can we just imagine it for a second, right? All eyes are on you, and there's some electric nervousness in the air, but it's positive because, people are expectant. They're looking at you. You're about to do something. And all of a sudden, just when you think things are going well, someone starts to heckle from the edge of the crowd. Who let this person in here? You're a loser. You don't belong here. And I don't care if you have nerves of steel, but that's going to give you an unsettling feeling, right? Your stomach knots up, your blood runs cold, you start to perspire on your forehead, and your ears are just red hot. And you're not sure if you're angry and want to yell back at that person, or if you just want to run and hide and forget that anyone ever gave you attention ever. Because maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here. I mean, what an awful feeling, right? Like, what an awful narrative to receive and begin to believe. Well, in our Jesus story today, there's a very similar experience, and we're going to be seeing how the power of words can shut down the good work that Jesus is doing around us. So I want you to open up your black seatback Bibles to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6. These are the wrong sermon slides. We need to be on 0430. It's the last 4 digits of the sermon slides. Sorry about that, tech team. That was probably my mistake leaving in last week's. So while we find that, though, you're going to be looking for Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6, which, if those slides come up there, it's going to also give you some question marks next to what page, because I forgot to look up the page there too. So I think it's page 26 in the black seatback Bible, or maybe 31, one of those. But you're going to find Mark chapter 6. And while you're finding that, I want to remind you that we're in the middle of a series about the scandals and rumors that surround the most famous person in history. Because we've been looking at some of these less known stories about Jesus. And today, we're considering the scandal that Jesus' birth was illegitimate. Now, for any of us that have spent any time around the Christmas story, we know the story of Jesus' birth, that it was a miracle. It involves his young mother, Mary, and a work of God, right? Joseph even had a dream from God to help him know to stay with Mary to raise a son that would not be his. But what did the neighbors think, right? Joseph and Mary were betrothed to be married. They're engaged and committed to each other. And then someone overhears that they had a fight. And we're not sure what's going on, but Joseph seems really hurt and angry. And whatever it was, Mary's parents didn't seem too happy either. And so Mary is all of a sudden away on a trip to go visit her distant cousin, Elizabeth. She's gone for 3 months, and when she comes back, she's wearing her clothes a little bit baggier. Or maybe she's put on some weight, we're not quite sure. But whatever is going on, it seems like Joseph and her have patched things up, and they even move up the wedding date. But by the time of the wedding, Mary has a very clear baby bump. Can you imagine the whispers at the wedding? Right? Like, oh man, all the old women are just shame of it all, right? The younger men are elbowing each other and trying to give high fives to Joseph, but he's not having any of it, right? Because he says something about, oh, it's not his, it's a miracle baby from God. And then someone goes, wait, say what now? Joseph said it wasn't his? Then what's he doing getting married to her anyways? Because the only miracle I'm seeing is that he's sticking with that cheating tramp. Oh, the shame of it all. And even next week, everyone's going to be called back to the hometowns of their clans for the census. And so even more people from the family are going to see Joseph and Mary They're going to see these newlyweds that are about to bring a baby into this world any second now. And even if you're not from the town of Nazareth, you can do math. How long ago were you married? Okay. All the dishonor, all the shame. And part of me wonders if the whispers even continued even when Jesus was a little boy, right? Did people comment on whether or not he looked like his brothers and sisters that Mary and Joseph had later on? Did the other children pick up on it? Was Jesus called names? Well, if you've been able to find Mark chapter 6 by now, we're going to read together and see the types of comments that his hometown brings to him today. So we're going to read Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 1. He, Jesus, left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. See, we start with the recognition that Jesus has been traveling and now is going to his hometown of Nazareth. Now, up until this point, he's been visiting all the other villages around the Sea of Galilee and teaching there and doing ministry and performing miracles. And most recently, he cast out a bunch of demons from a guy into a herd of pigs. And he's also healed a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. Oh, and he also raised a little girl from the dead. And now he heads to Nazareth, the town where he grew up and worked, and then left at the age of 30. But he comes back into town as a rabbi and a healer, a prophet with followers and disciples. Now, it was common practice in ancient Middle Eastern hospitality that any traveling teachers were invited to share a word in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. So Jesus is handed a scroll and he teaches from it. Luke also records this story for us in addition to Mark, and Luke's version has some other details to help fill out the story. So we know from Luke chapter 4 that Jesus is teaching from the scroll of Isaiah. And he's teaching about the Messiah and the year of the Lord, the year of the Lord's favor. And then he finishes teaching and he says, "Today, this has been fulfilled. I'm the guy. I'm the one who has made all this happen and is continuing to make it come true." And we can see that the response to Jesus wasn't all good. Many were astounded, and so they could have been amazed or filled with wonder, but others could have been astounded where they were kind of overwhelmed and wondering, is this really the guy? Because it wasn't all positive wonder. Remember verse 2, it says, "Where did this man get this?" It's almost like they're saying, who does this guy think he is, this guy? Where did he get all this stuff that he's saying? He couldn't have come up with it himself because he was trained as a builder, a carpenter, a normal manual labor kind of guy. He's not a scholar. And even they mention his deeds of power, but there seems to be some doubt as to whether or not they believe the stories that they've heard, or whether they just, aren't so sure that those things have happened. Because after all, he's just a local boy. We know this guy. He's nothing special. Isn't he the handyman, the son of Mary? Now, the fact that they don't mention Joseph is the scandalous part of this story. Because even if Joseph had already passed away, it was common for people to refer to someone by way of their relationship to their father, Joseph's son. And we still do this today pretty commonly with last names, usually coming from the father's side. And many last names, just like mine, are usually just abbreviated version of some male ancestor that I have. So Drew Williams means that I am Drew from some guy named William, his family line. I am of the Williams line. Or the last name Johnson is a last name that means somewhere back in your lineage was someone who was John's son, and then that name just stuck for everybody in that family. But Joseph isn't mentioned because they're perpetuating the rumor that Jesus' dad is actually unknown. Oh, we know Joseph raised him, but Joseph wasn't his dad. No, maybe he came from some affair or some other shameful tryst that Mary got herself into. Yeah, there's nothing special about this guy. We know his brothers. We know his sisters. He's the only one that flew off the handle and abandoned his hometown, abandoned his family, abandoned his business that his family was a part of. And now he comes back here all high and mighty? See, verse 3 tells us that they took offense at him. The word used for offense can mean to cause to stumble or to cause to sin. Their reaction caused such an angry response in them that it was actually sinful based on how he made them feel. It wasn't a small reaction. It wasn't a kind reaction. In Luke's version of the story, he tells us they tried to throw him off a cliff. That's how angry they were at his audacity for making the claims that he made. And Jesus responds to all that with this really interesting statement. He says, a prophet is usually honored except in their hometown and among their own kin or their clan and in their own household. And I bet he said all those because those are exactly the places that he was enduring shame and contempt thrown at him. Because after starting his ministry and helping a bunch of people, sharing hope, sharing grace, Jesus is in his hometown experiencing nothing but dishonor and shame, betrayal at the hands of his community and his direct family. And verse 6 at the end of our passage says that Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. He was extraordinarily disturbed. It threw him off because it hit Jesus. It hurt Jesus because he cared about these people, but they were casting him out. And apparently, in response to their unbelief, Jesus didn't do any deeds of power. See, in Jesus' ministry, miracles were almost always a response to faith. See, but it says that our version says that he could do no deed of power there, but it's not like he didn't have power. It's not like he wasn't able to, because he clearly cured a few sick people. No, it's more that he leaves his hometown of Nazareth, never to return because they forced him out. And I want to say that the biggest scandal of this story isn't Jesus' supposed sketchy beginning. No, the scandal is that these people had the Messiah right there with them, but they silenced him and they sent him away with their scoffing and their scrutiny. And I have to ask, do we do that? Do I do that? See, their actions, their treatment of Jesus actually limited the work of God in that area because Jesus didn't stay to heal a bunch of people. He didn't stick around to proclaim God's kingdom because they didn't want him to. They couldn't bring themselves to accept him as a healer and a prophet. I mean, apparently no one noticed the halo around his head. I mean, doesn't he always have the halo in the paintings that we see? Like, did they not notice that halo around his head? No, they must have thought of themselves as just his equals, and he's just a neighbor boy. He's just a local. He's just like us, a handyman from town. I wonder if I do that. I wonder if I limit the work of God in someone else's life because of how I see that person, through my scoffing, through my shaming. Oh, yeah, no, I don't think someone like that ever could really change. Oh, her? Oh, yeah, no. I'm always going to think of her as that little ragamuffin. Can't think of her any other way. Do we have a culture of honor in our speech? Or is casual dishonor more common in our conversation? How about this one? Do we expect people to pretty much stay the same? Or do we expect that God is transforming people? Because if we don't expect God to change other people, it's probably because we think that we're off the hook as well. We don't need to change. Because it is easier to not change. It's easier just to stay the same rather than being renewed and transformed to look more and more like Jesus. But the thing I want you to note from today is that our words of disbelief and shaming can limit God's work in our midst. Our words of disbelief and shaming can limit God's work in our midst. See, if we put our focus on what we see in people, focusing on their flaws or the weaknesses, it discounts the power of God that is able to work through weakness. If we label people based on their past and we think that they can't change, it betrays the fact that we think that we can't really change either. See, our words have the power to limit us from being a part of God's work. If we label people based on their weaknesses, and we only count whether or not they've failed recently, it shows that we believe that our righteousness and our life is based on our effort, not on grace or forgiveness. See, if we would prefer to heckle others or shame others, it shows that our own measure of self-worth is precariously built on pushing others down instead of lifting them up. Do we have a culture of honor or dishonor in the way that we speak? Because our words of disbelief and dishonor, our words of shaming, can actually limit the work of God in our church and in our community. See, whether we are shaming people into inaction or whether our words drive people away before we can witness God working through them, a culture of dishonor in our speech, a habit of gossip or negative speech. We know those pockets in our community, the people that get together just to vent and rant and only talk about the things they don't like. We know exactly what that's about. When those things happen, that limits our ability to see God at work in our midst. Because that type of speech can limit not only other people's willingness to actually step boldly in faith to do the next thing. Oh, I'm not going to step up and follow Jesus if all I know I'm going to get is heckling. But not only that, but it also cuts us off from where God is at work because it keeps drawing our focus to the negative. It keeps drawing our focus to only believe the things that we've seen before. Now, I've seen what they've done in the past. I know what they're capable of, and that's all I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to think that maybe God could change them. It keeps our focus on only wanting the things that we've become used to and familiar with, instead of waiting patiently on the Lord, trusting that He is able, even where we are unable. See, our words of disbelief and dishonor can limit God's work in our midst, and they are the opposite of what the Apostle Paul told the church in Ephesus. I want to put Ephesians chapter 4 up there. This is what Paul told the church in Ephesus. He said, "Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is good for building up, as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear." So what should we do instead? How can we apply this to our life? I have one idea for you. How about this? Maybe this week we share a story of God's grace. Maybe this week, instead of complaining or instead of remaining quiet, right? Because we were always taught from growing up, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. But sometimes that means we just keep ourselves quiet. And so instead of just letting the negativity be out there, maybe we share a story of someone where you've seen God at work. Where have you seen God at work doing something in someone's life that you didn't expect? Where have you seen God at work in your family or in our church? Because if God is calling us to cultivate a culture of honor, how can we do that in our families and in our spheres of influence here in our church? How can we use our words to build up instead of tear down? How can we cultivate an expectation that God is actually transforming us and He's actually transforming others in our midst? And therefore, how can we use our words to share stories about that? Because, and I don't know about you, but I've got one of the most negative, critical hearts there are. Those are the easiest words for me to come up with first, is all the things that are wrong, or all the things I don't like, or all the things that I would do differently if I was in charge, or all the ways that if I could only tell that person, I could fix that for them. And that comes most naturally to me, but I don't want my own words of critique and negativity to limit my ability to see what God is doing around me. I don't want my downward focus to keep me from seeing what He's doing. I don't want my disbelief to actually keep me back from being able to join in the work that He's doing. So how is God calling you to cultivate a culture of honor by sharing a story of his grace this week? Now, I recognize that it might be hard for some of us to actually think about that and conceive of that because maybe you've actually been the recipient of dishonoring speech. Maybe you've actually been the recipient of shame in speech. So maybe it's hard for you to think about creating a culture of honor because you've actually been the one on the receiving end of dishonoring and heckling. You've been the one that's actually been talked about. You've been the one that no one believed in or discounted. And so if that's you, I want you to hear this. Jesus endured all of the ridicule and shame, all of the scorn in his life, so that you could know that his grace and his love is for you. You see, sometimes we can let the burden of scorn and shame weigh us down. We can let it keep us back from God, from his healing, from his grace, from his redemption. We start to believe the lies. And so we stay back from taking that next step in faith because we don't think that Jesus can use someone like us. We don't think Jesus can transform someone like us. But the fact that the Jesus was born the way he was shows that he came to connect with everyone, and he wants to invite everyone into the fullness of life in the kingdom of God. There's an author, David Insom Brewer, and he wrote this. He said, "The scandal of Jesus' illegitimacy demonstrates that when God became human, he shared all of our suffering and redeemed every aspect of our fallen humanity so that he could represent and redeem everyone." See, Jesus had a teenage mom. Jesus was conceived out of wedlock and endured all the rumors and whispers about that. Jesus was a foreign refugee in Egypt. Jesus had a blended family, and he had half siblings. Jesus grew up poor, and he actually accepted funding from others and help from others. Jesus abandoned his hometown, and he left his family business. And Jesus was homeless, and he slept outside. And Jesus had sketchy friends, and he got in trouble a lot with church folk. But Jesus intentionally came in that way to be a part of normal society, not just upper society, not just certain parts of certain types of people, but he came so that we could all know that his love and his grace is for all of us. So whether you're rich or you're poor, whether you're a local or maybe you're not from around here, and whether your family is perfect or broken, Jesus' love and grace is for you. Whether you are super smart or just have street smarts, whether you've been successful or maybe you're down on your luck, whether you hang out with the right crowd or you hang out with the wrong crowd, Jesus has a plan for you and he can transform your life. And if you're still listening to me right now, I want you to hear Jesus is offering you his love and his life. And he's inviting you to follow him one step at a time so that you can join his work of restoration. See, the limiting words of others don't have to hold us back from God's work because we follow the one who has the words of life. We follow the one who can transform anyone. We follow the one who can overcome any darkness we've experienced, whether that darkness has been in our past or whether we're right in the middle of it right now. Jesus can and will overcome it. So let's put our belief in Jesus and let's put that belief into action, taking our next step of following him, trusting him to lead us and transform us.